which is a report from the city auditor regarding discrimination, harassment, and retaliation investigations. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning. My name is Marielle Dempster. I was the lead auditor on this project. I just want to start by thanking my team, as well as everyone at HRD and HR staff across the city that contributed to this project. The objective of the audit was to determine whether the city is effectively and equitably addressing discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. And with this audit, we really wanted to ensure that employees in departments across the city had all of their concerns taken seriously and addressed appropriately. To start, I'll just go over some definitions about what we're talking about today. So discrimination and harassment are behaviors as outlined in personnel policies that occur based on someone's protected class. Protected class, as you might know, includes things like race, gender, age, religion, and more. Retaliation is an action or inaction taken in response to an employee's use of their rights or benefits under personnel policies which adversely affect the terms of employment. That's a mouthful, but adversely affect includes things like demotion or denial of promotion. Also outlined as prohibited in personnel policies are employee conduct issues. Oftentimes these can look very similar to discrimination, harassment, or retaliation, but they are distinct, and this audit focuses on the items on the left here. We looked at this area because of the serious impacts that discrimination, harassment, and retaliation may have on an employee's overall well-being. It also can have an impact on the city's reputation as an employer. We have seen some lawsuits in this area in the past. One from 2016 prompted the council at that time to request an audit. That audit was completed in 2017 by a third-party auditor. That audit had 5 findings and 7 recommendations. We have been following up on those recommendations and have determined that so far 4 out of the 7 have been implemented since 2017. Some improvements that have been made since that time include the development of investigative policies and procedures. Training has been implemented for employees. Some outstanding items that are still waiting to be implemented include the improvement of the case management system and periodic reports on statistics from this area. In this current audit, we had 3 findings, 1 additional observation, and 5 recommendations. At a very high level, the city addresses discrimination, harassment, and retaliation by training employees on what it looks like and what the policies are around it, and then should complaints occur, investigating them and applying discipline when appropriate. Discrimination, harassment, and retaliation training is administered and created by the Central Human Resources Department and enforced by department management, and complaints are investigated by both Central HRD and HR staff throughout the city. Our first finding was that the city addresses complaints of discrimination, harassment, and retaliation through investigations. However, some investigations miss essential steps from the city's guidelines, are not well documented, or take too long. Because of this, employees cannot trust that their concerns will be properly handled. We made this finding based on a number of observations. When we reviewed investigation reports, we found that many were thorough and followed guidelines. However, some skipped critical steps like interviewing people named in the complaints. I'll share one example that we outlined in our report of this. It was the most alarming example that we saw of this. We found an anonymous allegation was made that a department executive had sexually harassed 2 employees. The complaint itself named the 2 potential victims, it named the potential respondent, and it named the respondent's potential supervisor. Despite having all 4 of these names, the investigator did not speak with any of the individuals and only spoke with the department's HR manager before determining that there wasn't enough information to carry this investigation forward. This is alarming for a number of reasons, not least of which is, according to the guidelines, the investigation should interview all relevant witnesses. The work was clearly inadequate in this case, and the fact that there were at least 3 named people and the very serious nature of the complaint, additional work should have been conducted in this case. And I want to clarify, it was not our intent with this audit to reinvestigate issues or to determine whether allegations were true or not. We were trying to determine whether the complaints that are made by employees are investigated thoroughly and follow guidelines. This example shows that that does not always happen. We also found that some investigations had unnecessary delays. The city's guidelines state that investigations should be completed in roughly 120 days. We found that less than 40% were completed in this timeline. We also saw some examples of delays that couldn't necessarily be explained. That included a 6-month gap between interviewing a complainant and interviewing a respondent in one case. There was another example in which we saw it took 2 months to even assign an investigator. Timing is critical in these cases because of the significant impact it has on the evidence that can be collected. Memories fade and records can be lost in some cases. Also, drawn-out processes simply cause significant stress and can exacerbate that for all the employees involved. One element possibly contributing to these issues is the possible inequitable resources allocated across the city. So as a reminder, some investigations are conducted by HRD and some are conducted by HR staff in departments. And while some departments have a dedicated HR staff and some even have dedicated employee relations staff, others may not have HR staff at all. You can see the ratio of HR staff to employees more than doubles in this chart here if you look at the various departments. So depending on what department you're in, you could have your complaint handled by someone whose sole job is employee relations or someone who has numerous HR responsibilities. These conditions create a significant risk for inequity in how these issues are handled. We also found that investigators may not receive enough training. The EEOC, for comparison, requires their investigators to complete an initial 32 hours of training and then 8 annual hours to maintain that. And our city investigators are only required to complete 1 8-hour training. This training was developed in response to the last audit. We also recommended in that audit that periodic training should be implemented. That has not happened yet. However, investigators may take this 1 8-hour training as many times as they'd like. Moving to our second finding, the city does not consistently track complaints or accurately track investigations. As a result, it is impossible to know how the city addressed all current and past complaints and identify trends. Inconsistent documentation may undermine employee and public trust. The prior audit recommended improving how the case management system was used or replacing it. However, we found that the same case management system is still used and it's still not being used consistently across the city. We found that departments may use additional methods to supplement this system, like SharePoint sites or Excel spreadsheets, and at least one reported not using this system at all. This makes it incredibly difficult, if not impossible, to understand the full scale of issues across the city and how they're being handled. We also saw instances where the information that was recorded in the system was inaccurate, and generally that system is quite challenging to work with the data from that. Despite that, we did find some statistics from this system. We gathered some information from it. We looked at the period from 2018 to 2024, that's fiscal years, and that's the period after the last audit was conducted. And during that period, 287 investigations were conducted. The most common type of allegation was discrimination, and approximately 77% of all allegations were unsubstantiated. I also want to caveat this information with according to official guidelines, only investigations are required to be recorded in this case management system, not the complaints or allegations themselves. So when we look at these statistics, this may in fact be an undercount of the overall allegations during this time period. To look at that a little bit more closely, we took a sample of 10 complaints referred to HRD. That sample came from complaints that were referred through our office. So our integrity unit often gets complaints of discrimination, harassment, and retaliation, or general HR complaints, and those are outside of our jurisdiction. So when we receive them, we document them and forward them on to HRD. We looked at the sample of 10 from that group because we had the exact details of what was alleged and when they were sent. Of those 10 complaints we referred, we only identified 3 in the case management system. I'll share one example from this that illustrates why that's an issue. One complaint we were looking for in this system was alleging inappropriate texting by a supervisor. When we looked for that complaint in the system, we couldn't find it, but we did find a very similar complaint against the same person. This complaint was clearly different. It had been submitted at a different time by a different person. However, one had been documented and one had not. And, taken together, these 2 complaints show a potential pattern of inappropriate behavior, but not tracking them in the same manner makes it extremely difficult to identify recurring issues. Again, I want to stress that we weren't trying to determine whether it did or did not happen. We just wanted to see that the issues were addressed consistently and fairly across the board. It also doesn't mean that the complaint that wasn't recorded was not addressed in some way, simply that it wasn't documented. Additionally, not recording these issues consistently makes it really challenging to pull information. If an employee requests information on what happened to their complaint, what the outcome was, it may be very challenging to do that and further undermine trust. Our third finding was in regards to preventative processes that occur at the city. We found that city employees receive insufficient training on discrimination, harassment, and retaliation, and many do not receive training at all. Broadly, just 2 training courses are required for most employees, the permanent civilian employees. They are a sexual harassment awareness training and a personnel policies training that occurs at new employee orientation. They are created and administered by HRD and enforced by department management. These trainings are required just one time at the beginning of an employee's career in the first 60 days. Best practices state that these types of training should occur annually or biannually. The prior audit also recommended implementing periodic training. Despite the sexual harassment training occurring just one time, it's a 20-minute training, you can take it online. We found that 44% of employees who should have a record of completing this training do not. Given these conditions, employees may not know what is acceptable behavior, and even if they do, they may not know all the ways the city has to address it. We issued one additional observation from this audit. Like I spoke about earlier, our scope was focused specifically on discrimination, harassment, and retaliations, but our findings may apply to other employee complaints and personnel policy violations. Employees may come to HR with issues that they feel are discriminatory, harassing, or retaliatory, but it may more accurately be an employee conduct issue. They are still very serious. They should still be addressed and investigated. However, they weren't included specifically in this data analysis. It's reasonable to assume that our recommendations and findings may apply to those cases as well. To address these issues, we're making 5 recommendations. The first is to improve training for HR investigators. The second was to update quality control processes for investigations. The third was to research and consider some alternatives to investigations when appropriate. The fourth was to implement and enforce the use of a new case management system. And the fifth was to require and enforce periodic training for all employees at the city on discrimination, harassment, and retaliation. I want to close my presentation by speaking directly to any of my fellow city employees who may be watching. I know that I have just highlighted some very serious issues that are occurring in this process. I also want to emphasize that it's extremely important to still report your concerns. We are reporting on the holes here. We're reporting on the issues that we saw. We also did review some well-executed and detailed and comprehensive investigations. HRD has also agreed with the recommendations we've issued, and we will be following up on them to ensure they're implemented. So if you do experience these things, I want to make it clear that you can report it to anyone in your chain of command, your department's HR staff, anyone at the HRD Employee Relations Division, and you may also report it through our office, and we'll refer it on to HRD. With that, I'll close and answer any questions you may have.
Members, what I would suggest is before we ask specific questions, if you have any, I want to ask management if it wants to say anything, and then we'll ask questions of everybody. Is that appropriate? Please, would you come forward? Thank you. Thanks for the report. We'll get back to you.
Great. Thanks, Mario. Well, good morning. I'm Susan Sins, the Human Resources Director here at the City of Austin. We did partner with the Auditor's Office for this investigation period. I joined the city in May 2024, and the audit just began at that time. In getting educated as to where the city was and the department was in handling these claims, I came to understand and realize that through COVID, we had lost about half of our investigator staff. And we got some new management in about 2022, maybe mid-year. We had Mr. Nathan Brown and Tina Gray Hale, who came to begin that heavy lifting in that transitional period. And through their work, they filled those vacancies. They began to understand, and they saw from that auditor's recommendation that a new system needed to be established. They've been working very hard to do that very thing. We fully embrace the recommendations and agree with the things that are here on this report. We know that we need the centralization of discrimination, harassment, and retaliation issues in central HRD. We need to look at those issues centrally, and we need to centralize that function. So we fully embrace that. Absolutely, the systems improvements are something that we've been working on. Look forward to implementing. We're doing Workday right now. We should have that beginning fall implemented. That's been a project that's lasted about 18 full months in its generation and in its implementation. The training element, we're very excited to leverage Workday Learning and Austin Essentials to train all of our employees on harassment, discrimination, and all that type of training they need on an annual basis. And the training's already begun. Mr. Brown and Ms. Gray Hale have brought in the EEOC, training our investigators, training our people that are handling these citywide. But the recommendation to bring this in-house for discrimination, harassment, and retaliation is very important, to have that uniform application of standard in these complaints that absolutely Mario was describing that are very important to address, make sure everything's happening for the right reasons, and they come to fruition and to a proper reconciliation of those issues. And that's really what I wanted to say.
Great. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, Mayor Pro Tem.
Thank you. Thank you for this presentation, and I appreciate your comments, Director Sins. And just a side note, I really appreciate that we're including the people who are presenting their names and titles here. Thank you. It's very helpful with the briefings that we're receiving. On the topic of discrimination, harassment, and retaliation, these are very serious matters and ones that I think we all take very seriously for the City of Austin. Part of what stood out to me is this pattern of some investigations taking too long, some complaints not getting investigated. I know we've learned all about the recommendations here, but I guess what I'll start with is and this might be a question for Ms. Dempster, is that were there any trends in terms of finding when you did identify that there were some complaints that were not investigated, that took too long, or one was entered in the system and one was not? Were there any trends in the subject matter or department? In other words, were they happening more frequently in a certain enterprise department? Was it happening? Did we notice these gaps when it came to executive management? Any other context that you can highlight as it relates to the findings?
I can touch on the complaints. I think that Mira was discussing was complaints that were going to the auditor's office, then being referred to HRD. I think with our system being one that we needed to work on, the AMON target system wasn't satisfying what we needed. I don't think there was a process and a protocol to get those complaints logged into AMON target. So that's not surprising that she didn't find all of the auditor's complaints in the AMON target system. Our solution to that is all complaints are going to go into our new system. Anyone that has a complaint, whether it's discrimination, harassment, retaliation, any complaint someone has is going to be logged into the system. So there is one one place where all of those facts lie. And so we're excited to implement that change, but that wasn't a surprising finding for us because we know how lacking aim on target was, our previous system.
And your new case management system, is that going to be integrated into Workday, or is that a new software that you'll be identifying once y'all are onboarded with Workday?
I would need to ask Mr. Nathan Brown to come and answer that question. I think there's an interface, but I need to be sure about that. Oh, great.
Good morning, Nathan Brown, Assistant Director. So that is going to be in our HR portal. So every employee has access to the portal, and they'll go in and they'll log that into the portal directly. So it'll be employee driven instead of us depending on staff.
But the HR portal, that'll be managed by Workday, is that right?
So eventually the goal is to implement Workday ER module, but their module is not really where it needs to be. So we've built this out ourselves, and it's a custom system for us.
Okay, this is a new customized system to handle all complaints.
Correct.
That'll roll out this fall.
This fall is our goal, and so, and that can be anything. General grievance processes, DHR, employee conduct, everything will be logged into that system.
Okay. Thank you. And then my last thing here is the fact that only 40% of employees have taken the sexual harassment training online. I didn't realize that was an option. I thought it was already a requirement. Is this something that the city management will be considering to formalize it as a requirement for all employees?
Yeah, that is a great question, and I'm really glad you asked that because it lets us highlight our Workday Learning module. Workday Learning will be where we can put that Austin Essentials in there. The harassment discrimination training can be in there. Trackable, we can follow up. There's many different ways to ensure that everyone gets that training. So moving forward, we have, I think, an excellent tool to make sure that happens.
Mm-hmm. And, departments should be notified if their division is 40%, where there's
Right.
60, more than half of employees have not taken the training, and that should be.
It should be 100%.
Should be 100%.
100%.
That's right. Thank you.
Thanks, Member Tim. Other questions? Yes, Councilmember Bella.
On the recommendation, this might be more for the auditor, but possibly research and consider alternatives to investigations to address complaints. What are we thinking about there? What does that look like?
Yeah, it would be, I think, more like mediation, if it's possible, if it's a tool. When we talk about harassment, discrimination, retaliation, just as Pro Tem Fuentes stated, it's serious. These are serious things. These are things that we really want to get to the bottom of, full of emotion, full of passion. There are times when that's not going to work, but maybe there are times when it can, mediation, and maybe there's an opportunity to do that. So I think the auditor's office was just highlighting the fact that that could be another tool that we could use to go ahead and possibly maybe speed up the process or make a more efficient resolution.
Great. No, and I understand. Obviously, there's some cases that would be maybe more serious where there's clearly an investigation is
Right.
warranted. There may be others where this is maybe less
Yes.
serious, where potentially just bringing it to the employee's attention and or some other less formal process and investigation. I guess that would kind of be the framework, if that's correct. I don't know if the
Correct.
auditor would want to speak to that as well.
Absolutely.
All right. Thank you.
Councilmember Duchin.
Thank you. Thank you for this really helpful presentation. I had a couple of questions. Early on, I believe it was touched on that sometimes the investigators are not speaking with the named people in the reports. Do we have any sense how often that is happening? Was that something that the report was able to clarify?
I would have to reach out to the auditor's office for that. However, I think centralizing the process will allow us to ensure a uniform application of standard. I know that wasn't happening in centralized human resources department, and of course would hope that wouldn't happen anywhere. But I think in centralizing this process is going to allow us to make sure that that doesn't reoccur.
Ms. Dempster, you want to add something?
Yeah.
Oh, please. Okay.
I'll just add that we it's a little challenging to know exactly how many times this happened. And guidelines do state that if there is a reason, if it's reasonable not to interview someone, that's okay, but it should be documented. In the cases we looked at, which were 21, of those 21, we found 7 instances in which we felt, or someone should have been interviewed. They were named in the complaint, they were not interviewed. We don't have a holistic statistic for that, but that gives you a sense of that.
So just to extrapolate then, if there were 287 investigations between that 6-year time frame, one could expect that a third of them potentially did not have people interviewed that could have been interviewed as part of that process?
Potentially, but I want to, it's possible, but that sample size is not necessarily something that you could extrapolate to that degree, but yes.
Okay. And then the next question I've got is both a specific and I think, for my purpose, a more broad technology question about, and I appreciate Mayor Pro Tem Fuentes' direction on this, but if we are going to transition and we're going to rely on Workday and we're going to have employees now submit the reports, we're still requiring on employees submitting their reports, and we're still requiring on people in HR or audit or whoever to go follow up on those reports. And by the same token, if we're requiring training also, the one that the 44%, I guess my question is really how are we actually, it's great that we've got a tool, a technology tool to help facilitate this, but what actual mechanism are we using to incentivize or encourage or actually create the utilization that we hope to achieve from this change?
Okay. Kind of multi-layer question. I think the first would be how do we ensure that people take the training? Every year we have a cybersecurity training. You know, I think it's just what we're looking to do in Austin Essentials is build that package that has maybe 5 core trainings that we have to accomplish every year, that we ensure that every employee is doing and following up and making sure we have 100% compliance. That's the first. How do we educate people who are complainants to use the system? And that is something that we're going to need to educate. And as they're making those complaints, maybe we need to sit with them as they're, putting in their complaint. We're going to have to come up with a training so people understand how to use the system as well. So that's a little bit of a work in progress, but we know that we are up for the task. We will be getting that done.
So thank you. And to build on this, this is partly my ignorance from being new, but is there a consequence to not completing those trainings right now?
Not completing the current harassment discrimination training. I don't believe there is. No.
Okay.
I don't believe there's a negative consequence out there. No.
Okay. So we're basically asking people, we're going to have them to do potentially more trainings, but there's no disincentive to not doing those trainings.
Yeah. Understood. I think it's also moving forward in the Workday Learning module. It is much easier to track who has taken it and who hasn't taken it centrally. I know cybersecurity training with Know Before is the very same way. You know exactly who hasn't, who has. And I think with Workday Learning, we'll see that same efficiency and we can handle it centrally. So I think that's a big step forward.
And last question, and this really, I think, is just about Workday itself, so I'm getting slightly off topic, but is this sort of the first, I guess, citywide deployment of an HR system or really any kind of updated CRM that we are deploying that all HR people across all departments would be trained on and used?
Well, I know that we're doing Workday, and that is a significant HCM citywide platform. I'm not sure historically, because I joined May 2024. I know that this employee relations module is one we will do very significant training on to ensure that the proper message and skills are there for the HR community, and also one more to the general employee population so they understand how to file a complaint.
And do we know anything about why people currently aren't using the system? Is it because of training? Is it for lack of resources? Is it because they're unaware of the options to report things in this way? Do we have any information on that?
I would need to ask our guru there. Yep. Mr. Brown.
So the current system, Aim on Target, is not for employees to input. It's only for HR staff across the city. So it's a challenging system. It's not super user-friendly, and so I don't think that it has been as successful as I think they wanted when they first implemented it. But the new system will be much better.
Okay, well, I'll look forward to the results. Thank you.
Thank you, council members. Thank you, and I'll ask Ms. Dempster if she wants to close with anything. Great. Thank you for the report, and thank you for the response.